In 1951, a small town in Texas was shaken by the sudden disappearance of a young woman named Dorothy Ford. Dorothy was known by everyone in the community, a friendly, vibrant woman in her early 20s, always with a smile, always ready to help. Her life seemed ordinary, predictable, yet beneath that veneer of normalcy, something sinister was about to unravel. It was a quiet afternoon when Dorothy left her home, telling no one of her plans. The streets were calm, the sun casting long shadows across the dusty roads. She had never disappeared before, and everyone assumed she would return by evening. But hours passed, then a full day, and Dorothy never came home. Concern turned to panic as friends and family began to search, asking neighbors, checking local hangouts, and contacting authorities. The police investigation started normally. They followed standard procedure, questioning friends and acquaintances, checking her workplace, and looking into any signs of foul play. But Dorothy seemed to have vanished without a trace. No one had seen her leave town. No one had heard any screams or disturbances. It was as if she had simply evaporated into thin air. Days turned into weeks, and the trail grew colder. The local police, constrained by the investigative tools of the early 1950s, found little to go on. Dorothy's family was desperate, putting up flyers, offering rewards, and pleading for any information. The town whispered theories, some dark, some hopeful, but nothing concrete emerged. Then, months later, an unexpected discovery would reopen the case. A local rancher, digging near an abandoned property on the outskirts of town, unearthed something unusual: a Ford coupe, buried deep beneath the soil, nearly 13 feet down. The car was remarkably well preserved considering its burial, but its discovery sent shockwaves through the community. Inside the car, investigators found belongings that confirmed it was Dorothy's vehicle. The realization hit like a thunderclap. Dorothy had been missing for months, and now her car, buried, held the first real clue to her fate. Who could have done this? How could someone hide an entire car so meticulously? And, most importantly, where was Dorothy herself? As detectives examined the car, the investigation took on a chilling urgency. Every detail mattered. The placement of the car, the lack of drag marks in the surrounding soil, and the impossibility of such a burial being done without help. Suspicion turned to horror as the possibility of foul play became undeniable. This was no ordinary disappearance. It was something calculated, something meant to erase Dorothy from existence. The small town, once comfortable in its sleepy routines, now felt the weight of fear. Residents began to question neighbors, strangers, and even the most familiar faces. Secrets that had been hidden for decades seemed to hover in the air, waiting to be exposed. Dorothy's story was no longer just about a missing woman. It was a puzzle, a haunting mystery that would consume the town's collective imagination for years to come. And somewhere out there, someone knew the rest of the story. Someone knew the truth about what happened to Dorothy Ford. And the question lingered: would justice ever catch up? Or would this case remain an enduring shadow over the quiet town in Texas? The discovery of Dorothy Ford's buried Ford coupe reignited a firestorm of questions. Investigators approached the scene with caution, aware that every inch of that ranch might hold crucial evidence. The car was placed under a forensic spotlight, its paint scratched but intact, its windows dusty, and inside, traces of Dorothy's personal belongings remained eerily untouched. A scarf, a small notebook, and a pair of gloves were among the items recovered. As detectives combed the area surrounding the burial site, it became clear that this had been no random act. The soil had been meticulously dug and replaced, concealing the car as though the perpetrator had intimate knowledge of the land. The deeper the investigators dug into the ranch's history, the more unsettling details emerged. The land had been privately owned for decades, isolated from the main road, and largely ignored by the townspeople. Whoever buried the car had chosen this location precisely because it would remain hidden. Neighbors recalled seeing Dorothy in the weeks leading up to her disappearance, but their memories were fragmented. Some claimed she had seemed anxious, glancing over her shoulder more than usual. Others remembered a stranger in town around that time. A man who had asked questions about Dorothy, who lingered near the grocery store and the bus stop. Yet no one had paid him much attention at the time. Now, in hindsight, those casual observations took on a sinister tone. Inside the police department, detectives pored over every scrap of evidence. Fingerprints, footprints, and soil samples were catalogued. But in 1951, forensic technology was limited. Investigators relied heavily on witness statements and careful observation. They noted that there were no signs of a struggle at Dorothy's home, which suggested that she might have been lured away, or that she knew her abductor and trusted them enough to go willingly. As the investigation unfolded, theories abounded. Some suggested a crime of opportunity. Dorothy had been kidnapped by a stranger passing through town, someone who saw an opening and seized it. Others speculated it was personal, a grudge, a hidden conflict that no one in the community knew about. But the meticulous burial of the car hinted at planning, patience, and an unnerving calm that terrified even the most experienced officers. Meanwhile, Dorothy's family endured unimaginable anguish. Days, weeks, and now months had passed since she vanished, and the discovery of the car brought both relief and horror. At least there was confirmation that she had been somewhere, that she had existed in the physical world beyond the missing posters. Yet the car's presence also confirmed the worst fears. Someone had deliberately hidden her from the world. The town itself became a character in the story, a silent observer of tragedy. People whispered in grocery stores and church aisles, wondering who could commit such a crime and how they could have done it undetected. The sense of safety that had once defined the community was gone, replaced by suspicion and fear. As night fell on the ranch, detectives remained, shining lights over the disturbed soil. Every shadow seemed alive, every rustling of leaves a potential clue. The thought that Dorothy Ford's fate had been sealed long ago, buried alongside her car, haunted them. And somewhere, far from prying eyes, the person responsible continued with their life, their secret intact, leaving the investigators to chase ghosts through the quiet streets of Texas. The case was far from over. Every lead demanded follow-up, every fragment of evidence a potential breakthrough. And as the town braced itself for revelations, one chilling fact remained. Dorothy's disappearance was no accident. It was deliberate, calculated, and someone knew exactly what they were doing. Weeks turned into months, and the investigation into Dorothy Ford's disappearance intensified. The authorities expanded their search radius beyond the ranch, interviewing anyone who might have seen something unusual in the weeks before she vanished. Investigators followed every lead, no matter how small or seemingly irrelevant. Each interview added a fragment to the puzzle, but the picture remained frustratingly incomplete. One witness, a local shopkeeper, recalled Dorothy purchasing a notebook just days before her disappearance. She had appeared nervous, glancing repeatedly over her shoulder. When questioned, Dorothy had insisted it was for personal notes, plans for a small trip she claimed to be taking. But investigators couldn't shake the sense that someone was watching her, influencing her movements without her realizing it. The suspect list, initially short, began to grow. Friends, neighbors, and even distant acquaintances were questioned repeatedly. Detectives focused on anyone who had been in the vicinity of the ranch or who had been seen near Dorothy in the weeks before she vanished. There was the stranger that neighbors remembered, a man who had asked unusual questions about Dorothy's routines. Authorities tried to trace him, but the trail had gone cold. Forensic examination of the Ford coupe provided unsettling details. The car had been buried with precision, suggesting someone familiar with heavy machinery or physical labor had carried out the act. There were no signs of a struggle inside the vehicle, no blood, no fingerprints other than Dorothy's, and no evidence that anyone else had been present. It was as though the car had been placed carefully into its final resting spot, the scene designed to hide the truth rather than reveal it. The town's atmosphere grew tense as more details leaked to the public. People speculated endlessly. Had Dorothy planned to run away? Was she the victim of someone she trusted? Or had she stumbled into something far more dangerous than anyone had imagined? Theories ranged from romantic disputes to criminal intent, but every explanation seemed inadequate against the meticulous nature of the burial. Meanwhile, Dorothy's family struggled with the emotional toll of the case. Her parents, once hopeful that she might be found alive, now faced the stark reality that the case was veering into territory they hadn't expected. Family gatherings were heavy with unspoken fears. Every ringing phone caused a surge of anxiety. Every newspaper article mentioning the discovery of the car brought both hope and dread. Detectives, despite the lack of modern technology, pursued unconventional leads. They examined old property records, interviewed ranch workers, and even enlisted local children to recall unusual sightings, hoping to uncover overlooked details. Every piece of information, no matter how minor, was catalogued and analysed, yet the central question remained unanswered. What had happened to Dorothy Ford herself? One chilling revelation came from a maintenance worker at a nearby abandoned shed. He remembered seeing the Ford coupe parked in a hidden spot weeks before its burial, seemingly untouched and waiting. This suggested that the perpetrator had planned the burial in advance, moving the car only when the timing was right. The notion that someone had patiently orchestrated Dorothy's disappearance from start to finish sent shivers through the investigative team. As the months passed, frustration mounted. Leads often dissolved into dead ends, and the case began to weigh heavily on the officers involved. They pored over every detail, sometimes returning to the burial site at night, hoping that under the moonlight they might notice something they had missed during the day. Every shadow, every creaking branch seemed to hint at the secrets hidden within the soil. Amid the tension, a subtle realization began to take hold. Dorothy Ford's disappearance was not random. This was not a crime of opportunity or a fleeting impulse. Someone had chosen her, observed her, and executed a plan with unnerving precision. It was a chilling reminder that evil could operate quietly, hidden beneath the surface of everyday life, and that a single act could erase a person from the world while leaving only the faintest trace behind. And through it all, the question persisted, haunting both investigators and townspeople alike. Who had the knowledge, the patience, and the intent to commit such a crime? The answer, as the case would slowly reveal, would be buried, both literally and figuratively, deep within the quiet, dusty outskirts of Texas. The hunt for justice was only beginning, and every day that passed without a breakthrough allowed the shadows surrounding Dorothy Ford's fate to grow darker. By the time investigators reached Part 4 of the Dorothy Ford case, the story had taken on an almost legendary status in the small Texas town. People whispered about it in cafes, in church halls, and at the local grocery store, each retelling layered with speculation and dread. But while rumors swirled, detectives remained focused on the concrete evidence. Every lead, every fragment, could be the key to finally solving the mystery. One day, an unexpected tip came from a local man who'd been living quietly on the outskirts of town. He claimed he had seen unusual activity near the property months before the car was discovered. According to him, a man had been visiting the abandoned land repeatedly, often at night, and carrying heavy loads that he refused to explain. At first, the investigators were skeptical, but the tip proved significant. It suggested premeditation. The car had not been buried spontaneously, but deliberately, with careful planning. Meanwhile, Dorothy's family continued to grapple with the reality of her disappearance. Her parents, once hopeful that their daughter might be found alive, had endured the slow, agonizing march of months with little to show for their efforts. Every day brought a new heartbreak, a new wave of uncertainty. Family friends tried to provide comfort, but the tension was unrelenting. It was as if the entire town held its breath, afraid that any wrong word could shatter the fragile hope that remained. As forensic experts examined the Ford coupe more closely, they noticed details that sent chills down their spines. The soil inside the car had been carefully packed, suggesting the vehicle had been placed and secured intentionally. There were no drag marks leading to the site, no signs that the car had been moved roughly. This level of precision hinted at someone not only determined but experienced in concealing evidence. Each discovery seemed to add to the horror rather than reduce it. Detectives also began retracing Dorothy's last known movements in painstaking detail. Her visits to local stores, conversations with neighbors, and the errands she ran became crucial threads in the investigation. They discovered that on the day she disappeared, Dorothy had stopped by a small cafe near the town center, where a waitress remembered a man sitting nearby watching her closely. The description was vague, but it was enough to reignite the hunt for the mysterious figure who might hold the answers to Dorothy's fate. The emotional toll on the community was profound. Parents began warning their children about strangers, neighbors eyed each other with suspicion, and even casual conversations carried a tone of unease. The disappearance had shattered the town's sense of security. It was no longer just a story of a missing young woman. It was a reflection of how fragile life could be, and how easily trust could be betrayed. As investigators dug deeper, they began uncovering other small but significant clues. Pieces of fabric, small personal items, and subtle disturbances in nearby properties suggested that the area around the ranch might hold more secrets than initially thought. Every night, officers returned to the site, shining flashlights into the darkness, searching for anything that could provide insight into Dorothy's disappearance. The land, once quiet and undisturbed, now seemed alive with hidden histories. The more detectives learned, the clearer it became that Dorothy Ford's disappearance was not a simple crime of opportunity. It was a deliberate act, executed with patience, skill, and a chilling disregard for human life. Whoever had done this had not acted impulsively. They had planned, observed, and ensured that the world would remain unaware of their actions. The realization left investigators grappling with the enormity of the crime and the haunting question: could such meticulous evil go unpunished? And yet, even as hope for immediate resolution dimmed, the investigation pressed on. Each new piece of evidence, each recollection from a witness, added to the growing mosaic of clues. The detectives knew that solving the mystery would require patience, dedication, and a relentless pursuit of truth. And somewhere, hidden among the quiet hills and dusty roads of Texas, the answers waited, obscured by time and the careful concealment of a criminal mind. The story of Dorothy Ford had become more than a missing person case. It was a haunting testament to human vulnerability, a puzzle of darkness and secrecy that refused to yield its secrets easily. And as the town braced itself for revelations yet to come, one chilling truth remained. Someone out there knew exactly what had happened, and they had left a trail that only the most diligent investigators could hope to follow. The investigation into Dorothy Ford's disappearance had stretched into months, yet the detectives refused to relent. Every lead was meticulously followed, every witness interviewed multiple times, and every inch of the surrounding land scrutinized. The deeper they dug, the more the mystery seemed to twist and elude them, as though the case itself were alive, taunting the investigators. Then, a breakthrough came unexpectedly. One of the forensic analysts, reviewing photographs of the Ford coupe, noticed faint impressions in the dirt beneath the car. They appeared to be footprints, but not just any footprints. These were unusually large, as if left by a man accustomed to manual labor, someone physically capable of moving the car and burying it so precisely. The discovery reignited the investigation, offering a tangible clue where there had previously been only speculation. Detectives began to reconstruct the sequence of events. Dorothy had likely been lured from her home or intercepted while running errands. The careful placement of the car suggested that the abductor had anticipated exactly where to transport it, using the remote ranch to avoid detection. Whoever had done this had studied the town, observed Dorothy's routines, and chosen their moment with precision. The realization that this was not a random act but a calculated crime sent waves of unease through the investigative team. Meanwhile, The community's anxiety reached new heights. Parents kept children close, neighbors scrutinized each other, and whispers of hidden dangers filled every conversation. The town's once familiar streets felt different. Each shadow seemed suspicious, each stranger potentially dangerous. Dorothy's disappearance had transformed the town from a quiet, sleepy place into a scene of subtle tension, where fear and speculation mingled with everyday life. As investigators continued, they uncovered more subtle clues: scraps of fabric caught on a fence, slight depressions in the soil near the ranch, and traces of tools suggested that the site had been prepared in advance. Every small discovery painted a clearer picture. Dorothy had not been taken by chance. The crime had been executed with planning, skill, and a chilling attention to detail. The perpetrator had deliberately erased her from the town while leaving just enough evidence to puzzle the authorities. The detectives turned their attention to potential suspects. They re-interviewed neighbors, friends, and anyone who had been near Dorothy in the days leading up to her disappearance. They looked for patterns, inconsistencies, and motives. A few individuals drew attention, including the mysterious man reported by the shopkeeper and the stranger seen near the cafe. But despite thorough questioning, leads repeatedly dissolved into dead ends. Dorothy's family, meanwhile, lived in a constant state of limbo. The discovery of the buried car had brought relief that their daughter's disappearance was not imaginary, but horror that someone had acted with such calculated cruelty. Every day carried a mixture of hope and dread. They clung to the belief that Dorothy's story could still have resolution, that the person responsible might someday be held accountable. As the investigation pressed on, the detectives realized that the key to solving the case might lie in small, overlooked details. Each piece of evidence was analyzed in the context of Dorothy's daily life. The errands she ran, the people she interacted with, the patterns she followed. They studied photographs, retraced routes, and reconstructed timelines. Every new insight added layers of complexity, but also clarity, helping to illuminate the shadowy path of the crime. Then, one chilling discovery changed the trajectory of the case. While examining old maps and property records, investigators found that the abandoned ranch where the Ford coupe was buried had once been associated with a man who had a reputation for secretive behavior. He had moved away decades earlier, but his connections to the land raised unsettling possibilities. Had he, or someone he knew, planned Dorothy's disappearance long before the crime occurred? The idea that the abductor had intimate knowledge of the property, combined with the meticulous burial, suggested a premeditation that was both shocking and terrifying. With each revelation, the urgency to solve the case grew. Investigators worked long nights, cross-referencing witness accounts, analyzing evidence, and following every lead. The story of Dorothy Ford was no longer just a missing person case. It was a test of human endurance, of patience, and of the relentless pursuit of truth in the face of fear. And through it all, one chilling thought remained. Someone out there knew exactly what had happened to Dorothy Ford, and for reasons unknown, they had hidden the truth so carefully that it had remained buried, both literally and figuratively, for decades. The search for answers continued, each day bringing the possibility of discovery, but also the haunting reminder that some mysteries are designed to remain unsolved, lurking in the shadows of quiet towns and forgotten lands. By now, the investigation into Dorothy Ford's disappearance had become more than just a local concern. It had captured the attention of the entire county. Detectives worked tirelessly, following leads that sometimes seemed trivial but often held hidden significance. Every day brought fresh insights, and with each revelation, the horror of what had happened grew clearer. One late evening, a breakthrough arrived unexpectedly. While reviewing notes from neighbors and local witnesses, detectives noticed a pattern. Several accounts mentioned a man frequently seen near the outskirts of town, always observing Dorothy from a distance. His description was vague, but enough to indicate he was meticulous, patient, and methodical. Someone who could plan an abduction and the subsequent burial of a car without leaving noticeable traces. Forensic experts revisited the Ford coupe, analyzing every inch for additional evidence. They discovered subtle scratches on the metal, possibly from tools used during the burial, and faint soil residues that hinted at the car being moved in a particular direction before its final resting place. Every detail added to the chilling realization that the crime had been executed with careful precision. This was not a random act. It was a calculated, premeditated event, orchestrated by someone who had thought through every step. Detectives expanded their search to the surrounding properties, interviewing former ranch workers, neighbors, and anyone with knowledge of the abandoned land. They learned that the ranch had once been used for clandestine storage and had a history of unexplained disappearances, although nothing as detailed or sinister as Dorothy's case. The more they learned, the more the pieces of the puzzle seemed to converge on a calculated plan executed years in the making. Meanwhile, Dorothy's family continued to endure the emotional toll. Her parents, once hopeful that their daughter might be found alive, now faced the grim reality that the investigation was uncovering a dark, deliberate act. Every day brought reminders of what had happened, news reports, whispered conversations, and the haunting knowledge that Dorothy's life had been violently interrupted. They clung to hope for justice, but the process was slow and agonizing, each lead bringing both possibility and despair. The town itself remained tense. Conversations were subdued, with residents constantly glancing over their shoulders. The fear that had settled over the community was tangible. People speculated endlessly. Who could commit such a crime? How had they hidden the evidence so effectively? And most chilling of all, could the person responsible still be among them? Detectives also examined Dorothy's personal life for possible motives. She was known as a friendly, well-liked young woman with no enemies, no known conflicts. Her disappearance and the subsequent burial of her car seemed to defy logical explanation. Every suspect considered by the police had some potential connection, yet none offered a concrete answer. The mystery deepened, and the sense of unease grew with each passing day. Then, an unexpected discovery shifted the investigation further. A local historian uncovered old property records revealing a prior occupant of the abandoned ranch who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances decades earlier. While unrelated in some ways, the pattern suggested that the land itself had a history of concealment, secrecy, and possibly sinister intent. Could the knowledge of this land, passed down or known to the abductor, have played a role in planning Dorothy's disappearance? The detectives could not ignore the possibility. With each new piece of information, the case became more complex and more frightening. The meticulous nature of the crime, combined with the isolation of the location and the deliberate concealment of the car, indicated a level of planning that left both investigators and the community unsettled. The realization that someone had committed this act with such precision, and that they had successfully evaded capture for so long, was a chilling reminder of human cunning and patience. As investigators pieced together the timeline, they began to understand the method behind the crime. Dorothy had been intercepted, her movements observed, and her vehicle buried to conceal both her and the evidence of the abduction. Every step had been calculated, every risk assessed. The case had transformed from a disappearance into a meticulously executed crime, and the pursuit of justice had become a race against time, memory, and the shadows of the past. And yet, even as investigators drew closer to understanding the sequence of events, one haunting question remained. Where was Dorothy Ford? Every clue, every witness statement, every piece of physical evidence pointed toward the meticulous nature of her abduction, but none could reveal her fate. The truth lay buried, both physically beneath the earth and metaphorically, in the dark recesses of a crime that had been crafted with chilling deliberation. The case had become more than an investigation. It was a testament to the patience, skill, and darkness that could exist in human nature. And as the town waited, tense and anxious, one certainty remained. Someone had orchestrated every moment of Dorothy's disappearance, and only a relentless pursuit of truth would eventually reveal the full story. After months of painstaking investigation, the Dorothy Ford case approached a turning point. The discovery of the buried Ford coupe had already revealed the careful orchestration of her disappearance, but investigators were still missing the final pieces, the clues that would bring clarity to a case shrouded in decades of mystery. Detectives revisited every detail with renewed focus, combing through the lands surrounding the abandoned ranch and re-interviewing witnesses. They began to notice patterns that had previously gone unrecognized. Certain individuals had been more observant than they initially realized, their testimonies revealing subtle hints about movements around the ranch and suspicious activity in the days leading up to Dorothy's disappearance. One breakthrough came from an unlikely source, an elderly ranch hand who had long avoided attention. He remembered seeing Dorothy's car being moved late one night, covered with a tarp, and guided by someone he described as strong and methodical. At the time, he had assumed it was routine maintenance or land work, but in hindsight, he realized he had witnessed the crime being staged. His recollection offered the first concrete link between the car's burial and the calculated intent behind Dorothy's disappearance. Investigators combined this testimony with the physical evidence from the Ford coupe. The soil layers, tool marks, and subtle impressions suggested a deliberate, skilled effort to conceal the car. This aligned with witness accounts and began to form a coherent picture of the crime. Dorothy had been intercepted, her vehicle strategically hidden, and the entire scene executed with precision designed to avoid detection. The meticulousness of the plan left everyone unsettled. It was a crime that required patience, knowledge, and chilling forethought. Meanwhile, Dorothy's family endured the emotional rollercoaster of hope and despair. Each lead brought temporary optimism, followed by frustration as answers remained elusive. Yet, the discovery of the car and the corroborating testimonies provided a measure of closure. They could finally see evidence of what had happened, tangible proof that their daughter had not simply vanished by chance. As the investigation progressed, authorities expanded their search for potential suspects connected to the land and its history. They discovered a man with a documented history of suspicious activity on similar properties, someone who possessed both the physical ability and local knowledge to execute such a crime. While definitive proof was still lacking, this lead offered the first real path toward justice. The town, meanwhile, continued to grapple with the case's unsettling implications. Residents realized that crimes of such meticulous planning could occur anywhere, even in seemingly quiet, familiar places. Dorothy's story was no longer just a tragedy for her family. It had become a cautionary tale, a haunting reminder of human cunning and the darkness that can lurk beneath ordinary life. Then, a final piece of evidence emerged, hidden in a nearby shed. Long overlooked, investigators found items that tied directly to the suspect: gloves, a tarp, and tools that matched the marks on the Ford coupe. These discoveries confirmed what had long been suspected, that Dorothy's disappearance was not random, and that the crime had been carried out with calculated intent by someone familiar with the land and its isolation. The revelation brought a mixture of relief and sorrow. Relief, because the careful efforts of investigators had finally uncovered the truth. Sorrow, because the circumstances of Dorothy's disappearance underscored the cruel reality of human deception. The meticulous concealment of her car and the planning behind her abduction highlighted a level of premeditation that was both chilling and heart-wrenching. Ultimately, while the precise details of Dorothy's fate after her disappearance remain a haunting mystery, the investigation succeeded in exposing the mechanics of the crime. The buried car, the witness testimonies, and the historical connections to the land revealed a story of calculated evil, patience, and secrecy. The case demonstrated the relentless determination of those committed to uncovering the truth, even in the face of decades of uncertainty. Dorothy Ford's story, though tragic, became a lasting testament to the perseverance of investigators and the enduring importance of seeking justice. Her disappearance, once a baffling mystery, had been transformed into a chilling narrative of human cunning and patience. And while the emotional scars remained, the discovery of her Ford coupe and the unraveling of the carefully orchestrated crime offered the community a sense of closure, however incomplete, and a haunting reminder. Even the most carefully hidden secrets can eventually come to light,